Good morning. My name is Bill, and welcome to my shop in downtown Antigo, Wisconsin, where I specialize in the restoration of antique clocks and vintage electronics. I've been in this location a little over a year now. It's a prime location right on the main drag north and south. Picks up a lot of traffic coming up from Chicago, Madison, and Milwaukee. A lot of business traffic in town, people hustle, bustle, going to and fro. So I get a lot of people looking in the window. I also have a side window which has a little saying on it that I had my man do who did my sign. He's very creative. I told him I wanted something to express my point of view about guns and about dogs. And he came up with this gem. Just kind of a glance around the shop, part of my bench, stuff up on top. This shop is only 12 by 12, so there's not a lot of room in it. Fortunately, I have a lot of stuff, and I have a lot of room to store my stuff in. I have customer pieces in here. I also have pieces for sale. And business is quite good. These pieces came in on Saturday, I believe. A circa 1938 air castle made by Detrola. Belmont Radio made this radio for airline around 1939. Sessions clock from the same era. Zenith console, a few radios for sale. A bench with the usual array of stuff on it, and we're back to the project at hand. Today we're working on an amplifier. This is a double D model amp from a 1951 D80 AMI jukebox. It was brought in for an estimate. The estimate has been approved, so I will be starting work on it here. Actually, I have started work on it. It's your typical 5-tube amplifier, pair of 6SN7s, pair of 6L6s, 5U4. Has the ceramic input, which I believe was 51 was the first year for the ceramic. A couple of years later, they went to magnetic, and prior to that, it was crystal. Volume control, which is a box. Yeah, that's it right there. And controls for treble and bass. Audio input-output transformer, power transformer, the speaker terminals, the chart for various configurations, and the turntable motor outlet, which is relay controlled. We have the capacitor cans. There's one electrolytic in this one, 3 in here, 2 in here, and we'll get into discussion about each one of those electrolytic capacitor cans in just a moment. Now, the problem when this came into the shop was a loud hum and cherry red tubes, particularly the 5U4 and 6L6s. So, being curious, but also being cautious, I connected the amplifier up to my Sencor power right, and I slowly brought up the voltage. At 90 volts input on the primary of the power transformer, I was monitoring about 1500 milliamps of current, a good place to stop. Under normal conditions at 120 volts, this amplifier will draw probably 850 to 900 amps or milliamps of current. So the place to start was the rectifier. Check the tubes, which normally I always do when I prepare an estimate. The 5U4 that I thought was the culprit was not. One of the 6L6s was shorted, not enough to cause the problem that we had, and the two 6SN7s were okay. So I'm going to flip this bad boy over, and we'll take a look underneath at some of the other work that I have done as well. This amplifier, except for one capacitor that I added right here, that I replaced, has never been touched. As part of the estimate, I will be replacing all of these coupling and bypass waxy capacitors. Now, I had just rebuilt my ICO 950B, which I don't use for checking capacitance. It's probably more accurate on the higher end capacitors than the lower ones. For that, I simply use my little handheld device. But I do use the ICO for checking leakage. And if I want to thoroughly check a capacitor for value and for leakage, I have the Sencor LC76, which works quite well. So I took the backdoor approach into troubleshooting this amplifier. I disconnected the leads on all the capacitors, on all the cans and individual filters, and checked them. And amazingly, for a 64-year-old amplifier, the electrolytics are all good. So everything was isolated. And I checked the secondary of the power transformer, and that was within specifications. So it was time to do a little bit more in-depth troubleshooting. So, knowing that the primary of the audio transformer is probably around 350 ohms, I decided to do a check, and I got 300 ohms. Well, that's lower than I like, but it wasn't like it was dead shorted. So I went to the plate of the 6L6 and checked that to ground. And in doing so, I found 20 ohms. There shouldn't be any resistance to ground. Then I went down to the plate of the second L6, of the second 6L6, and I checked that to ground. Now there was 280 ohms to ground. And by the way, I did, before I disconnected any of the electrolytics, I did check my output of my 5U4, and I had about 100 volts on it, so there definitely was a dead short. So I did assume that there was a shorted primary, probably to the frame of the audio transformer. And I've got a buddy in town who's been working on jukeboxes for many, many years. I had him bring me an amplifier, an AMI amp. He and I have a co-op effort. If somebody wants a jukebox repaired, he does all the heavy lifting. And by that I mean he does all of the mechanical work, the turntable, the relays, and the switches, and I do all of the electronic work on the amplifier. So he brought me an AMI jukebox double D amp. Oh, yeah, I was going to talk just a little bit about the capacitors here. This one right here is the input filter coming right off of the cathode. Goes directly over here to the center tap of the primary of the audio. This capacitor, very difficult to read these, and they don't provide you with voltages. I do have the AMI book for the A, B, and C, which does provide voltages on the various pins of the tubes. But anyway, this is the screen supply. This capacitor supplies the plate voltage to the phase inverter tube, both halves. This one supplies the plate voltage to the input audio on audio driver sections of the 6SN7. And then there's a capacitor right here, which I believe is 150 volt 10 or 15 microfarad capacitor, I don't remember which right now. It's providing bias on the 6L6. And then it's not shown on the diagram because I believe this was a modification. There's also another 10 or 15 microfarad capacitor. No, I said they're both 20s, I'm sorry. 20s on the cathode of the input section of the 6SN7. So with that, I'm going to set this one aside and bring over the amplifier that my friend Phil brought in. Now Phil brought this in with the 6L6 Coke bottles in it, but he didn't want to leave those behind, unfortunately. But it was nice enough of him to bring this over. Now here we have something that's kind of odd. Somebody has connected the hot lead, the red lead, over to the cathode of the 5U4. So there's 340 volts on that, or there was. It's been clipped. The chassis is in need of some work. I could rebuild this chassis, but I'm not going to. Somebody started, and as far as I am concerned, the work is sloppy. We have a couple of leads just barely soldered, and it's a cold solder joint. Over here, somebody replaced this old Tiger Point 02 cap with this ceramic. I just left that hanging. Looks like a cold solder joint there, and well, there's other things to it. I have checked the individual electrolytics in each of the cans, and those too are surprisingly good. So the next step is to remove the audio input-output transformer and put it into the amplifier that we looked at the start of this video. Well, that's about it for this video. I'm going to move on and do some work as far as replacing the input-output audio transformer, connect it up, and put in a few capacitors, and we'll give it a try. Thanks for watching.